Should I avoid joining a private equity-backed RIA? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is question number 103. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the RIA model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that I get asked from time to time. And if you listen to many of these episodes, you know how I talk about there's multiple pathways you could take to transition your practice into the model. So for some of you that might be starting your own RIA, for some of you that might be joining an RIA, and then there's some flavors in the middle. And so if you're looking at, for example, the path of joining an RIA, I have heard folks say, well, I don't want to join any RIA that is private equity backed, PE backed. And so what I want to do on this episode is give you a couple thoughts of how I usually kind of respond to that and why I don't think you should fear it as some folks do. And so again, this is kind of with the thought of, okay, if you're going to join one, is there a red flag there that you need to be careful about? And the fear is often that, oh, these private equity firms, all they want to do is sell, right? They want to buy it, they want to grow it, they want to pump it or whatever, pump it up, whatever kind of a phrase that you want to use. And their goal is just to sell the thing and move on, right? And so it's always this like, oh, all they want to do is sell, sell, sell. I don't want to be along for the ride for that. And so that's, with that kind of theme in mind, you have to step back and ask yourself, well, perhaps every firm is for sale. And so I want to give you a couple examples of what I mean by this and why you'll start to see that just because it happens to have private equity who might have a goal to one day have some sort of liquidity event, that doesn't differ a whole lot from almost every situation that's out there. So as an example, and these are in no particular order, and for some of you, this is either firms you're currently at, where you might think, oh, I don't need to worry about that private equity back thing and that whole for sale thing. And then so some of this you could reflect on where you're currently at and potentially new paths going forward. And so the first example would be if you work for a large brokerage firm now, you're at a wirehouse or some regional firm or whatnot, and it might not be occurring to you, your firm is for sale as well. And I experienced this firsthand, just as it was a good reminder of this. And this goes back to the 08, 09, turmoil in the markets. And I worked for a large publicly traded brokerage firm. And I know, obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty in all kinds of parts of the industry, but there was concern right amongst the employees of like, oh gosh, the stock's way down. Is someone going to come in and buy the firm and lay off employees? And so there was all kinds of worry about this. And at this big kind of firm-wide meeting, that question was essentially asked. I remember the CEO at the time said, okay, keep in mind, we're a publicly traded company. So whether it's 08, 09, or whether it's maybe more normal years, every Monday through Friday between 9:30 a.m. and 4 p.m., we are for sale. Anyone with capital can come in and start buying the business. And essentially, for the most part, we don't have any control over that. So even if you're at one of those firms right now, you are ready for sale. You cannot control who could show up today when the market opens at 9:30 a.m. And starts buying shares of the practice and potentially gains a big enough slice of the pie that they can start wielding influence on how that company is run. So keep that in mind. Any publicly traded company is already for sale every single day, Monday through Friday. And to give you some reminders for those of you that have been around a long time, these are certainly reminders. And for younger folks in the industry, this well, you've probably heard of this, but maybe didn't live through it. Some pretty extreme examples of this. Now, granted, this is during 08, 09, extreme market circumstances, but you look at something like a Merrill Lynch. No one would have thought that Mother Merrill, Mighty Merrill, was ever essentially going to sell themselves. If anything, they were a buyer, not a seller. And as we all know, Literally over a weekend, things had gone so bad that Merrill had to be scooped up and purchased by Bank of America. And so I don't think anyone would have saw that any time period, a year, 2, 3, 5, 10 years prior. No one would have predicted that. But again, every firm is for sale. Obviously, that's a bit of an extreme example of what caused that turmoil to generate that sale. But it shows you even the ones you don't think could ultimately find themselves no longer a buyer themselves. They have now been bought. And then kind of a similar period timeline example that a lot of people would not have predicted was when Citi sold their Smith Barney unit to Morgan Stanley. Again, who would have seen that sort of transaction coming? So this wasn't, in the case of Merrill, a complete acquisition. This was a carve out of part of the firm, was sold off to another firm. Again, I don't think anyone prior would have ever seen that coming. So it just demonstrates that you're always for sale, potentially in some capacity. So those are kind of two initial examples of big firm situations that you could be at currently, in some capacity. And you might think, oh, I'm immune to that. Well, there are people that were at Merrill and there were people at Smith Barney that thought they were immune to it at one point as well. And the world changed on them in some cases very quickly, very rapidly. So keep that in mind. Now, another example you might say is, well, I'm with currently, or maybe I aspire to be with a private firm. So we're privately held firm. We're not publicly traded. So that whole Monday through Friday thing, Brad, that doesn't apply. Well, guess what? Every private company is ultimately for sale at any given time as well. No matter what management says about, we are growing this thing and we feel best being independent. If the right buyer comes along and enough shareholders were to agree with it, and these might be, again, not publicly traded shareholders, but private shareholders, the company could be for sale. There's nothing you could potentially do about it because if you don't have the same influence that the shareholders do. And typically what you see with these kind of private companies is sometimes there's rumors, and this is in all industries, not just our industry. There'll be rumors about, oh, so-and-so company might be on the verge of acquiring this, smaller company or whatever the case is. And the response is always from the PR people of that smaller firm of, well, we don't comment on rumors in the marketplace. And they try to act like nothing to see here. And the reality is because there are, any given company, public or private, could have suitors reaching out. And with most companies, large companies, it happens all the time. But that doesn't mean it turns into anything. So out of fairness, it is fine for them to kind of deflect that. But the reality is those private companies deflect those messages all the time right up until a sale happens. And so they'll say, oh, no, we don't discuss rumors. Oh, no, we're not necessarily looking to sell. And then the next day they say, we would like to announce this wonderful partnership acquisition. We have been acquired from this firm. And they give you all kinds of spin about the cultural alignment and blah, 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 blah. But prior to that, hey, we're not for sale is generally the message. So I don't want to belabor on that, but the point is, even if you're at some non-publicly traded company, and even if they claim they're not for sale, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Your company could be for sale at any given time, or a company you could join that's privately held could be for sale at any given moment as well. Just something to keep in mind. So another example that you might think, okay, well, this will solve for it, is if I were to join an RIA. So I'm going a different direction. I'm going to join an RIA, but I don't want, again, you're thinking, I don't want private equity backed. I don't, want whatever you might have aversion to. And you say, oh, but this company, they are founder owned. So it's the original founders of the company that started it 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago, whatever the case is, and they own it. And so I can be comfortable that it's not private equity backed. I can be comfortable it's not publicly traded and anyone can just start coming and accumulating shares. And these founders say they're in it for the long run. And many of them are, but the reality is everyone needs liquidity eventually, right? So those founders, even if they say, oh, we're in this for the long run, at some point, they have to have some sort of exit strategy. Now, it might be near term, it might be long term, but at some point, everyone needs some sort of liquidity for their life's work. And even if they were saying, oh, no, we're going to keep this in the family, and even when I pass away, it's going to be handed down, to my kids. Well, guess what typically happens when the kids take over and have the shares? They sell it. So the point being, even if it's founder owned or closely held, whatever terminology you want to need, everyone needs liquidity eventually. So everything is for sale. It's just a matter of when that could occur. So again, I'm not trying to harp on this, but don't think that, oh, just because it's PE backed, that's the only kind of firm that could be for sale, that could change on you. And so the kind of final example, and then I'm going to jump into ways I think you can protect yourself knowing that this is the world we live in. But the final example I want to give that I often hear is, okay, well, I don't want to risk any of that. This is an advisor saying this. I don't want to risk any of those scenarios. So I'm going to start my own RIA and avoid any of that, right? And there are all kinds of reasons it might make sense to start your own RIA versus joining an RIA. I've done all kinds of episodes on that and talking about the kind of the pros and cons. But if your main motivation for starting your own RIA is because, wow, I want to own it 100%, I don't want to worry about potentially other owners in play, you're still not immune from potential M&A changes being forced on you. So a kind of perfect example of that are there are a lot of RIAs that you go back a couple years now when this started, that their main, if not sole custodian was TD. And they were perfectly happy having their assets at TD, and they had been explaining to their clients for years, if not decades, why that was the best place, that was the best custodian to hold their assets, and that's why the RIA chose them to hold the assets. And of no vote of that RIA, Schwab came in and acquired TD, and that even seemed like, wow, TD's so big, no one's going to come in and acquire them. Sure enough, Schwab comes in and acquires them. All of a sudden, there's all kinds of disruption, which we're more now on the tail end of it, thankfully. But for those RIAs that were using TD and had this essentially forced conversion to another custodian, they had no vote in that. So even though you might own the RIA outright, you don't have to worry about any other ownership slices or structures and whatnot. The world can still change on you in potentially in a big way, such as with your custodian completely, with no vote of your own, being forced to change on you and all the work that goes into having that and having to re-explain to clients what's going on and all that sort of thing. So I don't want to say this kind of in a Debbie Downer way, but there's just not really any situation where you can be immune to these kind of changes. So the question is then I'm going to get, well, how can you best protect yourself with that? But the takeaway first from just giving those examples of the different things that could be for sale or kind of in movement is, why fear that just because a company is private equity backed that's any more risky than any of these other scenarios? Again, a publicly traded company, literally, and it's usually done after market hours, that literally when the market closes today, there could be some announcement that company, the company you might be affiliated with now, has been acquired, and your world is about to completely change, and the dance partner you chose has now been changed with no vote of your own. So just because a private equity backed company might one day look for a sale, again, everything is going to eventually be essentially at least eligible to be sold, if not actually followed through with on that. So just something to keep in mind. I would not automatically assume just because it's PE backed, oh, that is more risky, or that is something I don't want to deal with, or oh, they're for sure going to sell. In the context of everything I've just been saying, I don't think you should put the fear into it like some folks are doing. Now, with all that said, I want to put this more in a positive path here of, well, what can you do to essentially protect yourself from all of these kind of scenarios that I'm talking about here? So the main one I suggest, and again, this kind of circles back to what I said at the top, if you're looking to join an RIA, it does make sense to understand, of course, their value proposition, their pricing. You can inquire about what the current ownership structure is. But the biggest way I believe you can protect yourself is to only align yourself or join what I call a free agent model. So that is a solution that you can join, and there's different flavors of that, different value props out there. I've done several episodes on how you can pick an RIA to join. But I believe it's very important, on quick sidebar, unless this is a transaction for succession reasons. If that is the case and you're selling your practice, that's kind of a different scenario. So set that aside. If you are more mid-career, you still have a runway ahead of you, and you say, okay, what's the next chapter? I want something better than I have now. And you're going to join a firm, is to join one that, again, to call it the free agent model, if you will. So what that is those are firms that say, not just say and then put in writing, hey, if you join us, here's everything we'll do for you. But if you ever one day feel you need to go in a different direction, so whether that's one day you want to have your own RIA or one day you just don't find them to be the best partner anymore, you are free to leave, free to take your clients. You don't need to worry about TROs or anyone being sued or anything like that. You are free to go. You are a free agent. Now, also think about what that does for that RIA firm, because that RIA firm doesn't have some, isn't putting up some big wall to try to keep you in, which a lot of the big, wirehouse firms and whatnot do. That is their strategy to keep advisors, to build a wall to keep you in. These firms, because you're a free agent, because you can leave whenever you want, they have to try to do everything to keep you happy, to keep you to want to stay there, which, right, being sarcastic, that's what a crazy idea. Wow, we will keep our advisors so happy they don't want to go in a different direction, not because of some handcuffs we've put on them with deferred comp or non-solicitation agreements or things like that. And so one, that's just generally going to be a much better experience for you, because those firms have to work hard to keep you. And as long as you always have that option that no matter what the circumstances, you could always leave, those firms have to work arguably harder than these other situations. So if a private equity-backed buyer comes in and buys one of those, you're all free agents. They know you are all free agents. They can't just come in and start doing draconian changes, because half or all of the advisors could just up and leave if they were to do that. And so your incentives are essentially much more aligned with that model, because again, people just can't come in and just start doing things knowing everyone's a free agent. That's an entirely different dynamic than if a PE firm or whatever comes in and starts buying some firm where there are all these captive constraints and ownership agreements or whatever the case is. That is going to be a different dynamic. But if you're in that free agent model, that is the number one way I think you can protect yourself. And hopefully you're finding a solution, finding a firm to join that you will be happy and ride out the rest of your career, that you won't need to one day make another pivot, but you always want to have that optionality down the line to be able to do so if needed, because if nothing else, that also keeps that firm and the management, the ownership of that firm in line and making sure your incentives are on the same page. And then just the final and second tip I'll give is just to remind you, change will happen. I don't care what kind of firm you're at now. I don't care what kind of firm you join. I don't care if you start your own firm, your own RIA. Change will happen over time. There will be regulatory changes. There will be vendor changes, M&A in the vendor space, technology firms. There will be ownership changes or acquisitions of various firms. So change will happen. And so you just have to accept that change will happen. And then you say, well, how best can I position myself to weather that storm? And so an example, if you were to be, again, joining an RIA, I think, yes, again, know their value prop, know their pricing, know their solutions, understand whatever their current ownership structure is. But the thing that you can have some degree of control over is to meet and understand the people that are in charge of running the firm. Because what you want to do is, when you know change will happen, again, we don't know what regulatory changes could happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. We don't know what the market environment could change, any of that stuff. So you want to say, okay, who are the people running this firm, making the strategic decisions that will impact me as an advisor? And I want to align myself with people that I think will best manage those changes when they come in my best interests. So we don't know what those changes are, but I can evaluate who the team is. And yes, there'll be turnover from time to time and members will change out. But generally speaking, you can get a feel for, okay, who are the kind of folks that work at a firm like this? And is there a good, essentially, culture? I know that gets thrown around way too easy, but you want to say, okay, hey, when that change occurs, am I comfortable that these are the people that are going to be looking out for me? And so I encourage you to put more weight on that than you are worried about maybe whatever the current ownership structure is, because again, all of that could change. You want to know who's the captain driving that ship that's going to be looking out for your best interest. So just as a reminder, kind of a long way to answer the question, should you fear a PE-backed firm? I would say that's no more risky than a lot of other scenarios. Again, whatever your current situation is has risk of ownership changes as it stands without you doing anything, without you having any vote. It could change underneath your feet. Or if you go in a new direction, will that new path one day have an ownership change? It may involve PE, it may not involve PE, but change can happen. So I would encourage you not to fear that, not to cross off any solutions just because they're PE backed, because even if you find a solution that's not currently PE backed, there's no telling what the future will hold. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, they might be PE backed. So you got to protect yourself in the same ways that I've been talking about here. So as I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. Having these kind of conversations is the type of thing I do with advisors all day long. I'm happy to have that conversation with you as well. The first things first, though, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all the resources I make available. Again, this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers. At the top of every page is a contact link. If you click on that, you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related and how it might apply to your practice. I'm happy to have that conversation. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.